plants of North Georgia, and Clark is our current UGA Extension Agent for both Lumpkin and Dawson Counties, and he's been in that role since 2012. He attended the University of Georgia and earned degrees in Horticulture and Pest Management. And the duty of the UGA Extension Agent, which you might ask, is provide education, technical advice, and he conducts research in many areas of agriculture, including tree management, home landscapes, vegetable and fruit gardening, and wine grape production. So if you're interested in starting your own winery, Clark will be the person to go to. He currently resides in Dawson County with his wife and 2 boys. And with that, I'll turn it over to Clark.
Thank you, Chris. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, good. Share my screen. Let's see. There we go. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for having me. I really appreciate being able to talk with you tonight. I'm Clark MacAllister. I'm the UGA Extension Agent. For those of you who are not very familiar with Extension, we are part of the University System of Georgia. We're also in partnership with the local county governments. And we serve multiple roles in the county. We have a youth development component, which is 4-H. You may have heard of that. I serve with agriculture and natural resources and deal with that side of things. We also have some different areas we cover, family, consumer sciences, and things like that. But just want to show you this map here that we have reach all over the state. We've got 4-H camps, we've got research stations that pretty much cover the state and serve different areas as needed. So if you have any questions about that, you can always reach out to us at the Extension office. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is native plants. And we're going to go over sort of the historical and Native American uses. And to sort of cite my source for pretty much all of this, or the better part of the talk, there's a publication. It's actually available over the internet. You can find it and get the PDF, or you can order a printed copy, but it's a really, really good resource, especially if you like to go out hiking through the woods and you're ever wondering, what little plants, what little perennials are popping up around me. Maybe you're curious about what's blooming at a certain time of year. This is a really, really good resource. So it was put together by Mickey Cummings, who was a former extension agent in Union County, one of Greg Shepard's former colleagues. And Greg, I saw you're on here. But it's a really, really good resource. And I used it putting together a lot of this. I use it actually quite often. Get a lot of photos from people out in the community. They'll send me photos or videos of different plants. And I've used this a lot to identify things that I just didn't really know offhand. So again, we're going to go through some of the native plants, some of the more interesting ones, at least to me. Most of these have blooms, so it makes them pretty interesting in my mind. And then there's also some information about sort of what the historical uses were for the Native Americans and things like that. So we'll get started here. I do want to do a disclaimer. We're always really cautious in, okay, I'm going to say something was used for this medical purpose by the Native Americans. Please don't take that as medical advice, of course. Please don't take that as me telling you to do this. I wouldn't want somebody to leave a note saying, I'm going to walk in the woods. Clark told me to go find this plant and I'm going to eat it, and then your family's going to come after me later. So please don't do that. I'm half joking, half not about this, but that being said, let's move on. So our first plant is Bloodroot, okay? And how I'm going to do this, we're kind of going to go through the season, the early bloomers, followed by the summer bloomers here. So Bloodroot, you're going to see it bloom in April, so coming up fairly soon. It's a perennial. It can get up to 6 inches tall. It's got a single stalk flower, and the flower's white and can have some purplish tint, pinkish tint in it as well. Of course, it gets its name because it's got this bright red juice that you can sort of extract from the root system. And this was used by Native Americans as a body dye, as anti-inflammatory, or used for its anti-inflammatory and antibacterial properties, but it can be toxic. I'm not sure to what level it can be toxic, but yeah, probably nothing to play around with if you don't know what you're doing, but still some interesting facts on that. All right, moving on. So our next plant is Trout Lily, a beautiful yellow flower. It's a perennial, about 6 to 9 inches tall. It's pretty easy to pick out because it's got these green leaves, but they're kind of mottled with a brownish purple spots on them. These will flower around April, and they've got sort of a nodding, drooping yellow flower with red spots inside as well. And the Native Americans use these for root teas, and they use these to break fevers, and then they use juice from the leaves to sort of help heal wounds. All right, next is Spring Beauty. Like its name implies, it blooms in early spring. It's a perennial as well. It's got a 5-petal flower with shades of white to pink on it. And the Native Americans use this as a food source. So the corm, or the corm is sort of an underground part of the stem that's got sort of scale-like structures over it. Those can be eaten like potatoes, and apparently they got sort of a radish type flavor. Next is common Sinkfoil. Okay, so this is a low mat forming perennial, sort of hugs the ground, doesn't get very tall. It's got these palmate leaves, sort of shaped like a palm tree leaf. The flowers are yellow. They've got 5 petals. And it had the Native Americans use this as an antiseptic and astringent, and they'd also use it as a gargle for mouth ailments. Next is Toothwort. It's an evergreen with 3-toothed leaflets, meaning the leaf is broken up into sort of 3 different parts called leaflets. The flowers are off-white and sort of have a pinkish tint as well. This is another one of the April bloomers, and it's found on rich wooded slopes normally. And the Native Americans use this. It's got sort of a pepper flavor to the roots, and they would mix it up into a gargle for sore throat ailments. Trailing arbutus. This has clustered leathery leaves. It's another spring bloomer. It's got blooms that are sort of pinkish white, fairly low growing. And its uses were, it was mixed with another plant, wintergreen, as a root tea. The roots were mixed in a tea, sort of aiding in indigestion. Next, we have mayapple. It's a perennial herb. Usually gets about 18 inches tall, and you usually find these in sort of large colonies out in the woods. You'll have a large mass of these covering a pretty big area. And these are spring bloomers, so April and May normally. And they've got a single white flower with several petals. And uses, you can use the fruit to make jams. I wouldn't eat the roots and leaves because they're poisonous. But the extracts are actually used to treat warts and carcinoma. So, some of these plants, although they've got historical uses and uses by the Native Americans, many of these are also used today in different treatments from the commercial medical community. Next, we've got blue cohosh. It's a perennial, can get up to 36 inches tall. It's got compound leaves, 3 leaflets. or 3 sets of compound leaves. It's an April bloomer. Its flowers are yellow-green, and usually in clusters of 1 to 3. It's got these bluish berries on it as well. The Native Americans used it. They made teas to facilitate childbirth, to cure toothache, and it was also commercially used sometime in the 1800s as a sedative. I don't believe it's still used that way, but it was then. All right, next is Stonecrop or sedum. It's a sprawling perennial. It grows very low to the ground, and you can see this growing over rocks and logs and bare soil. It's got whorled leaves, meaning they sort of grow in a circular shape, and they grow in whorls of 3. And the flowers usually have 4 white petals, about a ½ inch long or wide, so very small. And the Native Americans used these seeds in cough syrup mixtures. Next, we have a really fantastic looking flower here, Dutchman's breeches. These are perennial. They get about 12 inches tall. The flowers are white, about 3/4 inches long. They've got these 2 outer petals with long spurs, and there's not much else that really looks like that. So this is a really interesting bloom. And Native American uses, they use it as a love charm. I'm guessing that means they would kind of pick that out and give it to their loves and hopefully get in their good graces. They'd also make a leaf poultice for treating skin ailments and also tremors. Next, we've got pink lady slippers and yellow lady slippers. Both are perennials with leafless flower stalks. Usually solitary bloom, 2 petals. The lower petal is a showy pink pouch on the pink. And then, of course, the yellow is a yellow color. These are going to be April and May bloomers. And both of these were used as sedatives to treat nervous conditions. And I should step in and say, I believe all the Native American uses were sort of gathered from speaking to Native Americans in North Carolina. I believe is where most of this information came from, in kind of looking back where the information came for the publication. So next we've got false Solomon seal. This is another perennial. Can get up to 20 inches tall. It's got these long arching stems. It's got 2 alternate rows of leaves. It's got white flowers in this panicle form, so sort of a conical shape. And it's a spring bloomer, April and May. And Native Americans ate the berries, and they also used it as an eye wash. Next, we have the dwarf crested iris. This is a low-growing perennial. It doesn't get too tall. It's got these pale lavender flowers. And the Native Americans used it in a tea for liver ailments, and they also ground it up in a salve for ulcer treatment as well. All right, we've got next here, foam flower. So this is a very upright, erect perennial, getting anywhere from 8 to 20 inches tall. It's got flowers, fairly small, but they kind of grow in these, grow in this spike together. It's got 5 white petals on each flower. And the Native Americans use this to use the leaves to treat burns and skin ailments. And they also would mix the leaves in a tea for treatment of mouth issues. Next, we've got common blue violet. It's another perennial. Of course, its flowers are sort of that bluish purplish color with a white center. Spring bloomer, so blooming coming up soon in April and May. And this one, Native Americans used it, interestingly, as a plant soak for corn seed to protect against insects. And they also used it as a tea for a cough medicine type concoction. Next up, we've got umbrella leaf. This is a perennial herb, getting up to 36 inches tall. And the leaves are fairly distinct. They've got sort of this deeply lobed, toothed appearance, and they can be fairly large, up to 24 inches across. They've got small white flowers that usually appear in clusters, and this is more of a summertime bloomer, so getting towards the end of spring into summer, more of a May-June bloom. Cherokees use the plants in a tea to help induce sweating and treat smallpox. Don't know how well that one worked with the smallpox, but yeah. So next we have ramp. It's got tubers, or these sort of underground storage structures, and they supposedly taste like spring onions. But it is noted that if you have too much of them, the smell just does not go away for very long. So you have to be careful, I think, with how much you consume at one time. The leaves appear in April, and they're usually kind of gone by midsummer, by June. Flowers are greenish and purple, and they usually appear after the leaves go away in the summer. And the Native Americans use this as a food source, and they use a warm juice mixture to treat earache as well. Next, we have Laoswart. It's a hairy stemmed perennial. Can get up to 16 inches tall. It's got a cluster of pale yellow flowers, usually at the top. And this is, it can bloom between April and June. And this one had some Native American uses that help with bloody discharge from the bowels. And they also used it to rid their animals of lice, hence the name. Next, we've got a fairly distinct one that's usually easy for me to identify, a rattlesnake weed. It's another perennial, can get up to 2 feet tall. It's got these basal leaves, meaning the leaves sort of only grow toward the bottom of the plant. They're green, and they have these like dark purple veins that run through the green. So pretty distinct there. It's got yellow flowers in May and June. And originally its uses were the leaves were chewed up and thought to be a cure for a snake bite. So they would apply those on snake bites. Indian cucumber root. These can get up to 30 inches tall. They've got these whorled leaves, meaning the leaves grow around the stem in a circular pattern. The flowers are greenish yellow. Usually 3 to 9 of them appearing on a plant, and they nod, so they lean down. The Native Americans use these as a food source. They ate the root part of the plant. And the Cherokees apparently used the tea for kidney ailments. Next, we've got 4-leaf milkweed. These got to get about 20 inches tall. They've got lance-shaped leaves, meaning they sort of end in a point. And the flowers are sort of a nice light pink. They usually appear in May and June. And these were used by Native Americans as a laxative, and they would also use the fibers for bowstrings. Next, we have spotted wintergreen. These are very short, so these only max out about 8 inches tall. The leaves are white, or the leaves are green with sort of a distinctive white strip down the midvein. And they usually flower in June. They've got pretty flowers, usually white or pinkish, that sort of nod down. And usually have sort of a purplish stem as well. And Native Americans would use these to treat kidney stones. Next, we've got Bowman's root. This is a perennial. These can get up to 3 feet tall. They've got very narrow lance-shaped leaves. The flowers have 5 petals. They're fairly narrow and slim as well. And you will see these blooming around June. And the Native Americans use these for their hallucinogenic properties. I don't know much else about it. That's really all that was mentioned as far as the hallucinogenic properties, but they're there. Next, we have Galax. This is an evergreen or perennial. It's also known as skunkweed. The leaves are green in summer, and they will, if it is evergreen, they will turn sort of a maroon color in the wintertime. As you see in the picture, the flowers are sort of a spike-shaped, a conical spike shape and white. And the Native Americans use this in a poultice ground up to treat wounds. Next, we've got butterfly weed, and this gets up to about 2 feet tall. It's got really, really bright, distinct orange to orange-red blooms. You'll see those in the summertime, June through August. And the Native Americans would use this to treat lung ailments. All right, we've got Indian pipes. These are interesting. They don't really contain any chlorophyll, so you're not going to see much green there. And they get between 3 to 9 inches tall. And they're composed of sort of these translucent, waxy stems. They don't really have true leaves. They've more kind of got these scales, scale-like leaves. And the flowers are just these solitary, sort of urn-shaped flowers that nod down. So there's not much else out there like it. The Native Americans use these. They use the juice as an eye medicine to sharpen vision. Next, we have daisy fleabane. It can be biennial or perennial. Biennial means sort of goes through its life cycle once every 2 years. And these can get up to 30 inches tall. They're fairly erect. The flowers are what's called a ray pattern, meaning the petals sort of radiate from the center, and it's got a yellow disc in the center. And blooms in summertime, so July through August. And this was used to treat menstrual pains, headaches, and bad vision by the Native Americans. Next, a really, really common one. You'll see these on roadsides all over the county. Joe Pye weed. This is a perennial plant, can get up to 7 feet tall. The leaves are in a whorled pattern, 3 to 4 lance-shaped leaves in each whorl. The flowers are usually pink to purple, and they're sort of a later summertime bloomer, so July through September. Native uses, they treated kidney stones and fever. Next, we've got ironweed. This can get up to actually 10 feet tall, so very, very tall. The leaves are alternate and lance-shaped, so they come to a fine point, and just bright purple flowers. And another late summer bloomer, so August through September. And the Native Americans use the roots and leaves to ground up into tea to treat childbirth pain. Next, we've got Appalachian Oak Weed. This is an interesting one. It's known as a hemiparasite on oak roots. So it sort of grows and takes advantage of the roots of trees in the white oak species. So get about 3 feet tall. The flowers are this yellow tube shaped. They've got 5 petals on them. And it's a late summer bloomer, so August through September. And the Cherokees drank while fasting for 4 days, apparently. And this would have effects and allow them to see visions. Next, we've got another really, really popular one. You'll see these on roadsides all over the county. goldenrod. So these can get anywhere from 2 to 7 feet tall. They've got bright yellow flowers, alternate lance-shaped leaves. And these usually bloom later in summer, so August through October. And the roots from this plant were used in a tea to treat fever symptoms. So next we've got running pine. It's more of a moss. So its technical term, it's an evergreen, perennial, non-flowering, vascular plant. And its leaves are sort of this scale-like material, and its leaves are in sort of a fan shape. And as you can see in the picture here, that's the fruiting body, and that contains sporangia in these cones that are about 2 inches long. And the sporangia are sort of the fruiting structures of the moss, meaning those break apart, and that's how it spreads. And these are often found in clusters, sort of in colonies on the forest floor. And they're often found in conjunction with pink lady slipper. And so interesting about this, the dry spores from the sporangia were actually used as flash powder in early photography. A very interesting use there. And we've got Maidenhair Fern. So this is very common here as well. Fern with horseshoe-shaped fronds. The fronds radiate out in a horseshoe pattern. And this was used by Native Americans for fever relief. They mixed it up, used it as a hair rinse. And the Cherokees apparently used as powder, smoke, and snuff treatment for asthma. Very interesting. And Robbie had asked me to mention this one, so I had to put it in here. Foxfire. So Foxfire is sort of the term for a bioluminescence caused by the breaking down of wood in a wood rotting fungus. And you really start to investigate this, and there are several fungal species that are that have some of this bioluminescence attributed to it. You know, around here, it's probably something like an armillaria species, also known as the honey mushroom, and very, very common wood rotting fungus in the southeastern U.S. And so it's actually an interesting process that sort of a byproduct of the fungal hyphae breaking down the wood. There's actually some protein synthesis in this process, and there's an enzyme that is actually sort of elicited through this, and it's has bioluminescent properties. It sort of just gives off light. This is a byproduct, and it's not something I've ever seen. It's actually fairly rare. In really looking around, there's not really that many people who've got good firsthand experience with it. Apparently, it's best seen in early spring. The temperature is around 70 degrees. So you've got to be looking at the right time. It's got to be somewhat moist, but not too wet, not too dry out. And you kind of have to be looking for it. When you really look in the history of it, a lot of people have seen it, or folks out looking for firewood, or just people out hiking at night on a night that happens to have no moon that day. So it's something, you know, I'm definitely going to go try to look for it sometime, but the conditions have to be pretty much perfect. This is very, very interesting, this bioluminescent phenomenon. So here's an interesting story. It kind of ties into today, because what we're kind of talking about is a pandemic of sorts that's sort of caused by a pathogen that originated in Asia. So we've got some parallels to some of the big happenings in our life right now. So I want to talk about the American chestnut, and I termed it here a true American tragedy, because it really is. Once you really start looking into the history of the American chestnut tree, it really, really makes you sad. And as much as I've looked into it, it really hurts me that I'm not able to really see these trees anymore. So the American chestnut was once very, very pervasive tree in the forest of Appalachia in the eastern United States. So it went all the way from, here all the way up to Maine. It was a very, very massive tree. They were oftentimes up to a quarter, or oftentimes a quarter to half of the tree cover in certain areas. And of course, there are areas where it was 80-90% of the tree cover. And we're talking some of the old growth American chestnut trees could get upwards of 120 feet tall, 16 feet in diameter. And so I put these pictures here to just give perspective of how large some of these trees were. We don't have anything this size here anymore. It's sad, but so these were very, very numerous in this area up until the early part of the 1900s. So what happened? Well, first we're going to talk about why it's so good. So American chestnut, once you look back, because basically I'll give it away, these aren't here anymore. Okay, there's a fungal disease that got in here. But why was this tree so good? Why do we miss it so much? Lumber. This was basically the perfect tree for lumber. These things got really tall. They were arrow straight. The first 50 feet of most of these trees had no branches on it, so you're going to get perfect straight lumber. The wood had natural rot resistance. Tons and tons of the bark were shipped to tanneries because the tannins in the bark were used to tan leather. Of course, it made great firewood, and the mast, or the nuts that these things produced. When you read into some of the stories, walking through some of the forest land, even around here, probably, it was just feet deep in these American chestnuts. It fed, oodles and oodles of wildlife. It fed livestock. You read stories of large farms of pigs. They would send the pigs out, and they would be fattened on the nuts. Truckloads and truckloads and trainloads of the nuts were sent into cities around Christmas time, and of course they'd be roasted. So it fed people. These trees fed livestock, and great wood for furniture. Probably turn of the century furniture. A good bit of that stuff was probably made with American chestnut. So this tree was critical and essential to the Appalachian communities in many, many different ways. And it was just a great tree. They would have really been a big sight to behold. So what happened to these? Half jokingly calling this the pandemic, but this was a huge ecological disaster. Okay, we call it now chestnut blight, but there was a fungal pathogen that was not native to America. It was actually I think they sort of got it down to, it probably came over from China or somewhere in Asia over there. And what happened is it was sort of inadvertently moved to the United States. The pathogen was first detected in New York in 1904. And I've got some pictures of it here. It's a canker disease. So what it does is you've got these microscopic spores, and these are transferred by many ways. They can be blown in the wind. Animals move them around. They're spread by water splash. They can be spread by human activity, moving firewood as well. But what this is a canker disease, meaning this fungus basically lives in these sunken cankers on the tree. And the fungus gets inside the vascular system of the tree, and it slowly clogs up all the vascular system of the tree and all the tubes, and it slowly kills it off. But as it's doing that, it's also reproducing these spores. And so it's killing a tree, but it doesn't kill it quick enough to wipe itself out. It spreads its spores more and more. And so the chestnut trees in Asia did not, they were very resistant to this. So where they found it in Asia, it only killed, you would only see this pathogen on trees that were sort of already dying. It didn't really seem to affect the living trees. But when it got over into the American populations of in this different species, the American chestnut, it was truly devastating. And the estimates are it wiped out all the trees we had, the American chestnuts, which was about 4 billion trees. And there wasn't much we could do about it. It wiped them out fairly slowly. So again, it was detected in 1904. It took a few decades. It was probably by the 50s, there was just no trees left as far as American chestnuts. And there's nothing we can do about it at the time. There's really not much we can even do about it now. This disease is still around. It's still here. So if you see a chestnut tree now, it's most likely an Asian variety. And they can actually carry this fungus. They just don't really show symptoms. Now, you'll hear stories and you'll have people say, hey, I know where some American chestnuts are. I've got some, or I know where some, on a high mountain somewhere. And there are some American chestnuts still around. But what happens is this fungal disease, this chestnut blight, doesn't kill the root systems of the chestnut. So what that did was it killed the tops of the trees, and you get a bunch of new trees sprouting from the root system of that killed tree. And basically those new chestnut trees would be very weak. They'd get up maybe 15, 20 feet tall, just enough time for the fungus to kill them and spread more spores. So, although we have some chestnuts still around, it's not anywhere near like what it was. And it's just heartbreaking because I would have loved to see this tree, because I do love trees myself. And this would have been sort of our version of the California redwood. They were truly amazing trees. Now, you'll see some efforts now. There were some programs started, I believe, in the 80s, and they're still going. There's a Chestnut Foundation, and what they're trying to do is regenerate chestnut populations by using hybrids, meaning they sort of breed. They can find genetics from the American trees, and they breed them with Asian trees to try to find a right mix of, okay, this is tree, we can breed a tree that's 95% American chestnut and 5% Chinese chestnut, and hopefully that imparts enough natural disease resistance so we can get these trees going again. Again, that's been going for a long time. These trees take a long time to reach maturity. So if those programs do work out, I mean, it will be after all of our lifetimes and probably all of our grandkids' lifetimes before that it ever works out. But it's definitely a worthy cause. So look into that if you get some time. It's a very interesting story, very, very sad story. In fact, almost brought a little tear to my eye when you see how big those trees were, and just knowing we're not going to get to see them. And it's a shame. And before I ramble too much, this is my last slide here, but I don't want to end on something so dour. I want to end on a happy note. So earlier this week, let me start off, tell you about the Heritage Apple Orchard project we've got going. So myself, several other extension agents all over the northern part of the state, we were noticing that when we'd help our local clients out with their apple trees, it was always very frustrating. We'd have a lot of people try to plant new apple trees. They'd have a neighbor next door that had an old homestead, and it seemed like the apple tree had been there for 75, 100 years. And that apple tree had never been pruned, never been sprayed, never been fertilized. And every single year it put on a huge crop, and they never had to do anything to it. And yet here's this neighbor buying a brand new tree from a reputable nursery, and supposedly a recommended variety. And it's very hard to grow. You kind of have to spray them. You have to prune them all the time. They're not really suited to this area. And so we kind of went back and said, is there any way we can get these older varieties going? And we're talking varieties that were from the turn of the century and from the early 1900s, that were planted all over Georgia. And so we actually teamed up with a couple of history professors, and they were sort of on a different track, but they were trying to research older apple varieties as well. So we've kind of gotten together. We identified a bunch of old, I think 100 varieties of sort of older heirloom apples. And what our plan is, and what we've already started is, we want to have sort of a genetic repository for these old apple varieties, because if we don't save them, whoever's got them now, chances are they're just going to sort of be lost to history. And so what we did last year, so February of last year, we got together and we grafted 300, so three of each, 3 of 100 different heirloom variety apple trees. And we've planted them here, as you see in the pictures. We planted them this week, finally, after a whole year. We planted them at the Georgia Mountain Research Station. It's one of these extension College of Agriculture research stations in Blairsville. So what we're going to have, so we're planting, I think we planted 250 of these. And what it's going to do is hopefully help to save these older varieties. And we know what they are. We have them named. We have them identified. But this is just the start of what we're calling this heritage apple orchard. And we hope to regenerate a lot of these old varieties. And this will be a place where we can come every year. We have, a known variety of older heritage apple, and we can take grafts of those, take the scion wood, pair them to rootstock, and allow these older varieties to sort of repopulate here in North Georgia. And we think, and our hope is, that these will be much easier to grow. And, these are much better suited for this area. And just having more genetic diversity in our apple stock is going to be good. Because I don't know if any of you have ever tried to buy an apple tree from a nursery, but it's, we've only got about 7 varieties we can work with that the nurseries are willing to offer us. And so it's kind of sad. So this is hopefully a step in the right direction there. I hope part of this will be, my legacy when I leave, is that we did something good and we helped to repopulate something. We had really good varieties of apples, as far as, they didn't take a lot of management. Now these are not going to be, most of these are not the huge, Fuji apples you get at the grocery store. They're not going to be as big as your head. They're going to be smaller apples. A lot of them are going to have what looks like blemishes on the outside. They're not going to have a nice waxy coating on the outside like you get in the grocery store. That's all, a lot of that's artificially done. But these are ones we can grow here, and people can do that and not have that hard of a time. So this is something I'm really looking forward to. I'm going to be, once this gets going, I'm going to be pushing these apple trees on everybody. So I'll probably come to each of your houses, probably while you're not there, and plant these trees for you, whether you like it or not. So anyway, wanted to end on a good note here, and seeing that we are trying to hopefully make history of our own, or at least repeat history, because all these apple varieties were around in the early 1900s. They've sort of been lost just through neglect and the way the apple market is, and the way the nurseries have gone. But our own breeding programs have bred apples that just don't do well here. So we're trying to reverse that, almost go back in time and start over. So that's all I've got. I know I've rambled for a long time, but I'm certainly open to questions if there are some, or if not, I won't be offended.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Clark. We do have one question, and this is from Chris Warp, actually. He says, he asked, how many of these plants have medicinal use today?
Well, there's not that much difference between us and the Native Americans, right? As far as how much medicinal use they would have. I think a lot of these plants, sort of not as well known, but again, I did think I mentioned, a lot of these, they do use extracts from in modern medicine. That's not my area. So I'm not really sure on sort of the biopharmacological side, which ones get used where. But certainly some would still have that. If someone called me up and said, Clark, I heard that this would treat kidney issues. I'm going to tell somebody straight up, I'm not going to tell you to do that. You know, I would be really scared. That type of stuff really scares me, but certainly it was used. Now, you have to think too, what was the process that they went through to figure out what worked and what didn't? You know, there may have been a lot of people there that were the guinea pigs that something didn't work. And I would hope I wouldn't be that person, but yeah, certainly some still do have medicinal purposes.
Thank you, Clark. That's the only question I have. Y'all should feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question and ask a question. So just hit that little microphone icon and unmute yourself if you have a question. Jack has a question. Go, Jack.
Clark, I just thought I'd pass on to you. There is a Foxfire walk up at Anaruby Falls each year, and you can check with this district ranger and he can tell you when it's going to be. As you mentioned, it's a night hike, but when you meet at the falls visitor center, and the ranger leads you up the trail and points out where the Foxfire is glowing along the trail.
Very cool. Very cool.
But you need to check with the district office to find out when and where and all that kind of good stuff. But we talk about Anaruby Falls.
Okay. Great. Thank you. I was not aware of that.
Clark, you mentioned that you got some of your material from the book that Mickey Cummings wrote.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can see, I have the old 2008 edition. Are the newer ones still in this format?
So there's a newer edition than you have, because there's one that's got a little more color. And, you know, of course, Greg, like, you know, there's a few of the botanical names have changed.
Right.
But very small, you know, not a lot of them, but you can get an updated version. And let me see if I can, I may be able to post in the chat here, because I've got it up. I can post a link.
That'd be
This
great.
is a great size to slip in your pocket when you're going on a hike. I think
Right.
it's just a wonderful, useful one, and it opens up like this so you can see the photos. It's a great publication for people
Yeah.
that are slipping their pocket hiking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost a must for that. It's laminated, so can get wet. I think you can still get that copy for maybe $12. You can order it online. Yeah, it's $12 to get a little bit more updated. I think that was 2012, Greg, where they updated the new one. But it's relatively slim. It's good. If you don't want that link I sent has a PDF, so you can just have it on your computer as well. But really, really good resource. And I'm really glad Mickey did that.
Yeah.
I've used it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that link, Clark. That one right there.
Do we know anyone
I'm gonna
locally
buy
that
one.
sells those books? Is there anyone local that sells them?
It's a University of Georgia publication, and you know, you could order it online. If anybody wants some, so everybody doesn't have to order some, my office could order. You know, if y'all want to, if anybody does want some, y'all just let me know. Our office can order them. We can distribute them locally here.
Sure. That'd be something to keep on hand in the old jail for when we have it open for visitors to come in there, but not to
Yeah,
hand
we could order.
in mass quantities, of course.
Yeah, I may have some extra in my office too, an extra copy. I'll have to see if I've got a newer one, but we may be able to help you with that.
Okay. Great. Does anyone else have any questions or comments about the program?
I just might mention that Cliff Shaw has just published a book on his survey of old growth forests here in North Georgia mountains. And he does dwell on the chestnut, but he also talks about what, half a dozen other major trees. That there are a few of the old growth trees that are massive things hidden in small damp coves around in the mountains. And he's just put that book out just this year. And it's a well illustrated, lots of pretty color pictures. But he and his partners have rambled around in the mountains for several years recording all these things. But there's a lot of information in there too.
Very cool. Yeah. I'll have to check that out.
We have a question from the Delaware Principes.
I'm wondering, on all these plants that you've shown us, how many of those do deer eat? Or these things that deer don't eat? All these plants you've been showing us.
I'm sure deer nibble on a number of them. But I don't know if they're a huge food source for them. You know, certainly they're not getting eaten down enough where they can't repopulate, right? So they're, you know, it's different. All plants have certain levels of alkaloids that even if they're eaten on, you know, by humans or deer, you know, we can only take so much of that before our, you know, the alkaloid levels build up and our bodies basically start rejecting it. So, you know, there are sort of these natural plant defenses in most of these too. To what level and what level deer feed on them, I'm not really sure.
I'd also like to get one of those copies when somehow maybe Chris can get information to you on me.
Sure.
Yeah. Native plant guide.
Sure.
So Clark did put the link to that in the chat box. If you go in the chat box, there is a link to that book. Exactly. If you click on it, you'll go to that book, and you can download a copy or buy one.
So I have a comment, Clark. Could you tell us where your office is and how to get in touch with you when we need you?
Yes, I should have made a bigger deal about that. I usually do. Our office is at 26. If you want the Lumpkin office, of course, I've got a few offices, but if you want the Lumpkin County office, we're at 26 Johnson Street, which is in the basement of the current planning office. I think we'll be moving upstairs sometime once they get everybody moved to the old library. But for now, we're in the basement, and it's behind the old historic jail there, behind the. I guess it's the Holly Annex. I guess it is what that is now.
The old cannery, yeah.
Yeah, the old cannery. And so you could several ways to reach me. I'm pretty easy to find. Hopefully through like a Google search, you just search me or just put extension Lumpkin County. You can find me. But my email, I'll put it here. Anybody needs to copy it down, clarkmac@uga.edu. Our office phone number, 706-864-2275. Those are the best ways to reach me. And if I'm not in the Lumpkin office, chances are I'm down here at my Dawsonville office. Or if not, I'm out in the woods or in a field somewhere, and I'll call you back as soon as I can. So.
Thank you.
Hopefully I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Clark for agreeing to spend some time with us tonight and share his knowledge on the local native plants and that apple project. That's very, very good. The Heritage Apple Project. I really am looking forward to that. But again, like you said, we probably won't be around in our lifetimes to enjoy it. So.
Well, the Apple project, a lot of us will. You know, it's although they take a little bit to get to maturity. I'm going to push this thing hard, so I'm going to get these varieties out, and I'm going to be tasting those apples for sure. So,
all right. Well, next month's program, I will be hosting it, and it will be on American Revolutionary War veterans that have lived and in some cases died in Lumpkin County. And a little bit of background on this. I've been researching this for the past couple of months. And what started off as investigating the two Revolutionary War soldiers, which are buried in Mount Hope Cemetery, turned into a list of 23 veterans that may or may not have lived in Lumpkin County. So I had to go ahead and start investigating each one of these names one at a time and found some interesting results. So our next program will be on Thursday, March 11th at 7 p.m. So hopefully everybody can tune in for that. And